That's me, the rebel without a pause, the James Dean of the airwaves. Note to younger listeners, he was a film star back long ago. I'm going to be talking about long ago in the course of this monologue and in the course of the show, except it's not that long ago. It's not that long ago that people would walk along the street whistling and holding a tune. I'm asking when and why whistling went out of fashion. And last night, because it was Valentine's night, I took my wife to the pictures. Note to younger listeners, that's the movies, the cinemas. I took my wife to the pictures to see Green Book, which was one of the finest, most moving, most powerful movies of my life. And it was the more powerful for the fact that I was there when people like Nat King Cole, whose death anniversary in 1954, this is today, maybe no, it's his birthday. It's, look, I'm being advised, I'm getting what people say is inspiration. He died in 1965, but that doesn't clear up whether it's his death anniversary or not. Either way, I'm asking my friends through the glass to pick up some Nat King Cole. I'll tell you why he's in my mind, because in Green Book, it tells the story of an erudite, genius, American black man called Dr. Shirley. I'd never heard of him before, but he was a contemporary, and it was happening exactly to people like Nat King Cole, who decided to take his genius on the road with Jack Kennedy in the White House and Bobby Kennedy as the Attorney General, testing out whether they were actually allowed to play in the same place as they could eat, whether they were able to play and then go to the lavatory in the auditorium in which they were playing. And of course, they couldn't. In state after state after state of the Union, the character, Dr. Shirley, is turned away from the dining room, from the lavatory, whilst being permitted to perform on the stage. And Viggo Mortensen, a man I greatly admire, a political fellow traveller, soulmate of mine, gives, I think, an Oscar-winning performance as the Italian-American who's hired by Dr. Shirley to accompany him on the journey. So it's not that I'm not going to be talking about long ago, but there's much more to talk about. I learned long ago that next to the chief executive, and often more than a chief executive, the person who knows most about what's going on is the person on the desk, the person at the door, on the door, the attendant, the workers at the bottom of the tree. They know everything. That's why I'm in a position to tell you exclusively here on Talk Radio that Chuka Umunna had booked this afternoon a large conference room in Portcullis House in the House of Commons in Westminster to launch his new breakaway formation. Unfortunately for our deadlines, I'm also in a position to tell you that late this morning he cancelled it. It was the second cancellation in 2 days. The initial proposal was a Valentine's Day breakup, that all these heartbroken Blairites in the Labour Party would announce on Valentine's Day that their love affair with the People's Party was over and they were going across to the plutocracy instead. But they cancelled that, thinking correctly, if I'm right, that that would be a trifle cheesy. So it was to be today, and then it wasn't today. Will it be tomorrow in time for the Sunday papers? What's going on in the clique? The Limehouse declaration that we've been waiting for. I was there when the Limehouse declaration was made in East London in the early 1980s, when far greater figures than they, far greater figures than Ian Austin, John Mann, and people whose names I can't even now recollect, though they are still in Parliament. People like Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams, David Owen, Bill Rogers, stood in Limehouse and declared that the Labour Party of Michael Foot was no longer for them and they were for the off. And we'll be looking in the course of this show at what happened next. It didn't work out for them, not least when I dumped Roy Jenkins on his well-upholstered posterior out of Parliament in 1987. But it did work out for Margaret Thatcher. It kept her in power for an entire decade. Will the same thing happen again? Is that the purpose of the breakaway? All of these are questions that we'll be dealing with this evening. We'll be talking also about the shocking state of the Conservative Party. It is not genetically possible for me to feel sorry for a Conservative Prime Minister, to feel sorry about the state of the British government, because I want it out yesterday if we can't have it out today. But the reality is, Britain is facing its biggest challenge since Hitler was at the Channel ports in 1940. And Winston Churchill was required to step forth from the backbenches and take command of a country that was headed for surrender to Adolf Hitler and the Wehrmacht marching up the Mall. I know that that's a dramatic comparison, but it is accurate. We are about to make a life-changing, generation-changing change to our national life. We're about to leave the European Union after all these decades. And there's only days to go, 40-something days to go, and we have absolutely no idea the basis on which we'll be going. And events in Parliament this week made it even less clear where we're headed and in what order. So I'll be talking to my old friend Steve Norris, a former Conservative minister, a former Conservative mayoral candidate not once but twice, and a sage of the British political scene, to try and get some handle on where stands Britain. And having spoken at some length, perhaps too great a length, about the new centrist party, I'll be talking about the new Brexit Party with its leader and founder, Nigel Farage. I suspect that that new party will have a more profound impact on British politics, on British life, than anything Chuka Umunna has planned. When the last time we had European Parliament elections, Nigel Farage won them. Can you believe it? He got millions and millions of votes. He won the largest number of members of the European Parliament. If only he'd stuck at it. If only after the referendum he hadn't gone off to take a rather too long breather. Then Brexit might not be in the parlous condition that it currently is. But let's not be churlish. He's back to breathe fire down the necks of the Conservative Party to make sure that they deliver what the people voted for, and to breathe fire down the necks of the Labour Party that if they end up backing a second referendum designed to countermand the decision of the first before it's even been implemented, he'll breathe fire down everybody's neck. I know him. He can do it. Now, I don't know if it's fire that's killed off all the bees, that's killing off all the insects and all the bugs, but on the day that thousands and thousands of school children left their classrooms and poured onto the streets of Britain demanding urgent action on climate change, I'm going to be talking about the fact that we are losing our insect population. As anyone my age knows, When I was a child, there were insects, butterflies, bees everywhere. And now there are none. There were sparrows everywhere. Now I had to explain to my youngest children just the other day in Camden Lock what this bird that was there was. It was, dear listeners, a sparrow. And lastly, Donald Trump. I listened to his unhinged statement today on the building of this wall, and I wondered if he had not crossed a Rio Grande of consciousness. I wondered if this was not the day that Donald Trump literally went mad, because no sense could be discerned from what he was saying. He has declared a state of emergency in America because he says the country is being invaded, except it isn't, Donald. It's you that's invading other people's countries. It's not Latin America that's coming to you. It's you that's going to Latin America. It's you who is appointing guys in the street as presidents and then sending in your armed forces to implement your decision. I tell you this on the day, the anniversary, the 16th anniversary of that day in London, when me and Jeremy Corbyn and a few others led a march of millions of British people against a regime change war in the Middle East, about which, amongst many other things, we said, nothing good can come of this. This will all go disastrously wrong. Will anyone now contradict me? Is there anyone now who will say that we were wrong 16 years ago, this day? Everyone accepts that we were right, and the idiots who did it were wrong. Yet those idiots are still in power. Those idiots are still at their typewriters. Those idiots are still at their microphones and in their studios, and they're marching you into yet another disaster. This time in Latin America, on top of the world's biggest oil field. What could possibly go wrong? Minister, I have no idea why he's not in the House of Lords, because he's the best spokesman for the Tory party, admittedly in a desert of competitors that I know even today. We travelled many places in the world together, and although we're on opposite sides of the political fence, it's all very civilised. Let's see if we can keep it that way. Steve Norris, welcome to the mother of all talk shows.
Oh, it's a privilege to be on, George, and to listen to Nat King Cole. My goodness,
how wonderful!
He was the best. He was just brilliant. I have him in my car. My wife complains that I just play the same stuff all over again.
It's
and
so beautiful, utterly beautiful. And the peg for it is not just his death anniversary, but the movie Green Book. If you get a chance to see it, because the situation in our lifetime, when Jack Kennedy was in the White House, of entertainers like him, Sammy Davis, and so on, in the United States during what was effectively apartheid, Jim Crow, is simply gobsmacking to see. In this film, you'll cry a tear. Take your wife to see it. I did last night. Steve, talking of crying, Mrs. Thatcher left in a taxi crying. Mrs. May didn't even come to the house to let us see her crying about her latest travails. I've never been in a place like this. I've never been in a political space or moment like this. Where is it headed as we head for the biggest decision we've made since putting Churchill in 1940? We're headed for an absolutely epic change in Britain, and yet nobody knows really where we're going.
I think that's a very fair summary, and I think neither you nor I have ever seen anything like this. Nobody who was born after the Second War has seen anything like this. This is extraordinary. This is a government without leadership, a party without leadership, two parties arguably without effective leadership. One has to ask why on earth Mrs. May was prepared to, put forward a motion which was almost certainly bound to be defeated. I mean, when 66 Tory MPs abstained on the motion that she lost earlier this week, it may not be the end, but my God, what a signal does it sell? Under any normal circumstances, a Prime Minister would have to resign. Problem that we've got is that, first of all, Mrs.
Well,
May...
you do remember, Steve, that Chamberlain won his motion of confidence. He only resigned because 80 Tories abstained.
Yes, indeed. And I think, that's exactly right. I mean, we're just in completely uncharted territory. And I think the way I read it is this. I believe that that there is a deal which a majority in the House of Commons, rightly or wrongly, is prepared to accept, and that was the one that was endorsed in the vote not this week but 2 weeks ago, which was to say, your deal, Mrs. May, plus sort out something that you should never have allowed to slip away, which is the issue around Ireland and the border and, a hard border with the Republic. If she can do that, then you know what? She could get that through the House of Commons. At the moment, the EU is saying, no, we gave you a deal, that was the deal, and we're not prepared to move. I tell you what I think has changed. I think the fact that the Cooper-Bowles amendment, this is Yvette Cooper from Labour and Nick Bowles from the Tories, put forward an amendment that would have effectively outlawed the idea that the UK could slip into, what they call a hard Brexit, the World Trade Organization rules. The fact that actually we could do that theoretically we could just slide into WTO rules, scares not just a lot of people this side of the channel, but an awful lot of the 27, the other countries of the European Union. And I believe that actually they will see that they are going to have to save her from herself. I don't think she really knows where she's going. She ploughs on almost blind, and with these sort of dreadful setbacks which would kill any normal leader, and she just goes blindly further on. I think the reality is they will save her from herself.
Look, I don't want to get into parliamentary arcana, but as she already had that parliamentary majority in her pocket 2 weeks ago, why bring forward a motion doomed to lose and thus undercut all of whatever credit she had from winning that vote 2 weeks ago?
I really wish I could give you a rational answer for that, George, as somebody who's been a staunch conservative most of my life and who actually, I have to say, was a supporter of Mrs. May as leader. I was one of those who saw her as strong and stable and hadn't realised that actually in the event she's weak and wobbly. You can't. It is absolutely inexplicable that she should have taken such a risk and, of course, ended up losing, as I say, by 302 votes to 258. That's colossal, absolutely colossal. And it's her own people who are actually undermining her. We're in really difficult territory. We really are.
Yes, and running fast out of time. We'll talk later, not much later, so stay by a radio set if you can, to Nigel Farage about his new Brexit Party, because if this all goes wrong, if Brexit is ruined by one parliamentary faction or another, one party or another, one combination of factions and parties, the stab in the back theory will be a very powerful one indeed, won't it? And Mr. Farage will have a lot of fuel in his tank.
I think he will. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think people, I don't know whether you get this sense from the people who you speak to, George, but I get a very strong sense that people just want to get the ludicrous business over with.
Yes.
The country voted to leave. Yep, there's no point in arguing whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision. It was the decision of the British people by a million majority, and so we're going to leave. But my God, did we ever think that we would be leaving on this basis, that it would be so chaotic, so attenuated, so hopelessly managed? And, it pains me to say this, but the truth is Mrs. May is a decent, honourable, Christian-driven, dogged woman who is absolutely hopeless at negotiation and even worse at leadership. And that's something I don't think many of us, when we applauded her leadership on the steps of Parliament, ever appreciated. We now know it. And my own view, incidentally, is that it is precisely as we drift towards the 29th of March with no deal that it'll be the EU 27 who say, look, this is going to be bad for the UK. But it's equally bad for us. Already, you see, in EU countries around Europe, there are those saying this is going to cost us jobs. We are not going to be able to sell to the same degree to the British economy, and it's an important economy. The UK is, after all, the world's sixth largest economy. We're a very, very big market, and we import more from the EU than we export to them. I think they'll savour from themselves. Maybe call me a doe-eyed optimist, but
that's also my view. So we'd both be doe-eyed optimists if that were so.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Eurozone, it's on the edge of recession already. Our growth figures are nothing to write home about, 1.4%, but France is even lower. Germany is lower. Italy is already in recession. Arguably, Germany is already in recession. Why would they want us to crash out, as they say, with all the economic consequences that come with that?
Precisely. I think that's exactly the point. They are actually facing a fairly stark choice. Here is this woman who wanders into Brussels repeating the same old Maybot mantra time after time. It frustrates them enormously. They can see her drifting towards a very, very unstructured WTO rules exit. Ollie Robbins, her favourite, apparently, EU civil servant negotiator, may think this is a strategy. It's not. It's a complete absence of strategy. And I think what it actually means is that those countries who are desperate to try to recover their own economies are going to say, look, for goodness sake, do a deal with the Brits. Do we really worry that much about the idea of a hard border in Ireland? Of course we don't. Can it be done technologically? Yes, of course it can. Give her, for God's sake, something so that we can actually resolve the British mess. Because actually, as you hinted to, George, the real truth is that in Europe, they've got far more dangerous problems than Brexit. They're desperately worried about the rise of the far right, the AfD in Germany, the Five Star in Italy, the new Gilets jaunes, who are far from left-wing. They're a very right-wing bunch. They're anti-immigrant. They're a really unpleasant lot. These people are going to do very, very well in Europe elections if we're not careful. And the last thing that Brussels want is to add to all of their troubles by seeing an untimely exit for the UK from the EU, causing everybody even more pain.
Lastly, and I'm grateful for your time, Steve, as you may have heard in my introduction, I happen to know because, like you, I always maintain good relations with those who know everything that's going on, by which I mean the policeman on the door, the attendant who takes the bookings, and the young women that show people through the corridors of power. They often know more than the people at the top, and therefore I know that Chuka Umunna had booked the conference room in Portcullis House this afternoon for the launch of his new enterprise. I also was one of the first in the country to know that he'd cancelled it, but it can only be a postponement. The line is that the right wing of the Labour Party will leave, the left wing of the Tory Party will leave, and the Liberal Democrats sitting there in the middle with a leader who's about to retire and who was on this show last week confirming that. Do you think all of this is going to lead to the cliched word, a real realignment in British politics?
No, I simply don't. I think Chucker cancelled because he realised that actually he, Chris Leslie, and one or two others who've either been deselected or are pretty well aware that they're about to be, would look pretty silly. And that it's precisely because there is no guarantee that Tories, even those on the left of the party, the Anna Soubries, the Sarah Wollastons, would necessarily join. There's no clear evidence that Liberal Democrats would want to be part of this new body, not least because we don't yet know what its philosophy actually would be, and because ultimately you and I lived through, in parliamentary terms, the history of the Social Democratic Party, who at one point had 40-odd% of the popular vote and who simply imploded. You know, the truth is that one of the features of the 2017 election was the re-emergence of two-party politics. And I think Chuka Umunna may very well decide he can make a lot more money being a lawyer and, you know, being able to afford all those expensive suits. But the reality is that as the founder of a new party, I think it's a dead duck.
Steve Norris, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Well, you heard Steve Norris, veteran Conservative, former MP, former mayoral candidate, former minister in John Major's Conservative government. The Centre Party, a dead duck, says Steve. Theresa May, a bot who went haywire. What do you think? Where do you think Britain stands? The number to call is 0344 499 1000. You can email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk and then your message to 87222, although that will cost you 25 pence plus normal charges. You can tweet me though for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Get your calls in now. We'll call you back when it's possible to put you on the air. A lot of people are disappointed every week that we didn't get back to them. But if you call now, then you're far more likely to get on. SMS Andrew. Dear George, I'm glad the kids had a nice day to bunk off school, but had they not done so, they might have learned that climate change is a natural event. And Tommy says, George, I've just watched BBC South's Today News, and honestly, nearly at top billing was an item about a young man getting the keys to a new council house surrounded by press. My wife and I actually felt happy for the person. But what has it come to when the headlines are, man gets council house? What an extraordinary SMS. Thank you, Tommy, for that. John says, Trump continues America's long list of illegal regime change interventions, seeking control of Venezuelan largest oil reserve in the world to help feed the American greedy war machine in the Middle East. Well, let me tell you, John, invading Venezuela will end up just like invading Iraq did. David Leviscont says, Hi Gigi, I don't know if the die-off is climate change or overuse of poison by both agriculture and in people's gardens, pesticides and weed killers on an industrial scale. Good question. Dan El Rojo says, well, whilst workers from across Europe, from Paris to Athens, are struggling against the rapacious neoliberal EU, any leftist who still supports it should be viewed as if they were crossing a picket line. And the Red Resistance says, well said, Gigi, these monsters who lied us into war are personally responsible for the death of millions, should be spending the rest of their days begging for our forgiveness. Instead, you have people like Blair and even Elliot Abrams on our TV screens. Now, our usual anonymous texter, I've got a kind of separate box for hate from anonymous texters, so I'll read it. You insulted a Green MSP who dared suggest Churchill wasn't a hero. You going to do the same with your mate O'Donnell, who called him a villain, you two-faced gobshite? No, but I will speak about Churchill, actually. That's why he's an anonymous texter, you see. He's sitting in his underpants and his vest in the upstairs bedroom of his mum's house, hiding behind a computer screen, calling me that word which I wish I hadn't read out. But the point that he makes, I have already dealt with at very great length. I have made, and it will be freely available on the internet, probably as I speak, but if not, very soon. A whole 30-minute History Boys programme with the cleverest man in England, Adam Gary, in which we debate the question, Churchill, hero or villain? My answer is absolutely unequivocal. As listeners to this show and the show I did since 2005 on TalkSport, long time, already know that I consider Churchill to have been both a hero and a villain for virtually all of his life, a hero for but a moment. It just turned out that that moment was the most important moment in our entire history. Scouser Lars says Luciana Berger couldn't bring herself to say she wants a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn. This is probably the view of all the centrist careerists in Labour. The sooner Umona and his clique go, the better. And the aforementioned Adam Gary, my fellow history boy, and the cleverest man in England, says, I hope George Galloway can ask Nigel Farage if, like me, he favours a new and dynamic post-Brexit China-UK trade deal. This is crucial, seeing as the Defence Minister would prefer to make war on China rather than to trade more with China. I wish I'd had more time in my monologue to address this question, so let me address it now. As my friend, the brilliant writer John White, pointed out on Twitter the other day, never before has a UK Defence Secretary begun his day in the land of the giants, only to end it in the land of Lilliput. He was referring to the fireplace salesman, don't tell him your name, Pike, Gavin Williamson, who started the day this week threatening China, as if this were the days of the Opium Wars, when we bombarded China until it agreed to allow us to go on shipping in opium, heroin, into their country, not realizing that China is now the most important, the most powerful country on the earth. And little Gavin in Little Britain, on the eve of Brexit, when we're looking for markets and trading partners, in front of a picture of an aircraft carrier which doesn't have any aircraft, threatened China. And Mrs. May was forced to slap him down by the end of that day. But China has not been pacified and has cancelled talks with Britain about a UK-China trade deal. And I wrote to Theresa May, as politely as I was able to tell her that her Defence Secretary was a clear and present danger to the interests of the United Kingdom and must, as a matter of urgency, be dismissed from his job. The beautiful voice, the beautiful human being, Nat King Cole, whose death anniversary we mark on this auspicious occasion. It's always auspicious when you get Nigel Farage on your show, and I'm grateful for him agreeing to do so. Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening, George.
Now, first of all, tell us why you've set up this party and how it's going.
Well, the reason is very simple. We voted in a referendum, and one in which you and I stood shoulder to shoulder, saying we should take back control democratically of our lives in our own country. We voted for it. We won. We had a general election the year afterwards in which 85% of voters voted for parties saying, trust us, we'll take you out. We then saw an incredible 498 MPs vote for Article 50, which said, on the 29th of March 2019, we leave either with a withdrawal deal or without one. And yet, here we are, 42 days away from that date, and we see attempts by the Blairs and the Dominic Greaves and even the Speaker of the House of Commons to frustrate or stop Brexit from happening. And I'm not going to stand idly by after a quarter of a century of fighting hard, I did fight damned hard, for us to become a free, independent, sovereign nation, I will not stand aside and watch these people throw it away because their friends in big business tell them it's the right thing to do. So we formed the Brexit Party, and for me it's very sad in one way because obviously UKIP was very much my creation in a sense, but UKIP under its new leadership has decided to go down a sort of a far-right anti the religion of Islam, as opposed to being concerned about the extremes of Islam direction, has involved the Tommy Robinsons of this world, who I just don't think electorally are the right people to be involved. So we formed the Brexit Party. It was registered with the Electoral Commission this time last week, and I can tell you that at the moment, 10,000 people every single day are registering their support for it.
Well, that is extraordinary. I have said on here many, many times that our great tragedy was that though we won the referendum, neither you nor I were in the Parliament, nor anyone else who would properly stand up for Brexit. The Conservative pro-Brexit crowd you wouldn't buy a second-hand car from, and you'd lock up your daughter and your wife if they came calling. And your son in some cases. And so there was nobody in Parliament actually fighting for Brexit. And the result is misery, isn't it? We've got a Parliament that overwhelmingly hates Brexit. And therefore, how could they be expected to properly deliver it? But having said all that, Theresa May has managed to turn in a performance so dismal that were she a footballer or a football manager, she would long ago have been dismissed and be out of the game. How has it come to this, that we're 40 days away, we've absolutely no idea what we're doing or where we're going?
Well, the Theresa May thing is remarkable in the sense that, clearly within the Conservative Party, Boris was the favourite to take over. Michael Gove knifed him in the back. I think because of Boris's personal life, which, I don't think people actually care about particularly. I mean, who gives a damn? All of us live flawed lives. We finished up with a Remainer in charge, but she's not just a Remainer. She is literally a functionary of the civil service. And this Ollie Robbins character, and history will show, this was the man that designed a Remainer's Brexit. And in life, when there's a fork in the road and a decision to make, whether it's moving house or changing relationships or whatever it is, you take a decision and you do your very best to make it work. She's tried to please both sides of that divide. She's not decisively taken either of those directions, and it's into that vacuum that she's left that the big global money, the George Soroses and everybody, the Blairs, and everybody else have come in. So I think actually, even though, and you're quite right, 77% of our Parliament voted Remain, had we had good, decisive, strong leadership, George, my view is the country would have gone with her or him or whoever was in charge. This is a failure of leadership on a dramatic scale. And I would say that she's not just the worst Prime Minister I've seen in my life, she's also the most duplicitous too.
Now, how is this going to work? Is your party predicated upon there being no Brexit, there being a half-assed Brexit? Is it predicated upon us fighting the European Parliament elections because we've delayed leaving? What's the game plan?
Well, there are three outcomes here that are possible. One is that we leave with her deal, which will not be amended significantly. I do not believe that will happen. The second is we leave without a deal, which at the moment looks like rather the best deal to me, on WTO terms. And if that happens, then I'll be very happy because we can, basically get on with our lives, but I don't believe that will happen. I think that what's going to happen here is they're going to kick the can down the road, as they've done throughout this whole process. And I think the Yvette Cooper amendment that didn't quite get through the other day, I suspect at some point in the next few weeks that will pass. And I think Brexit is going to get, Article 50 will get extended, And that means we'll fight the European elections. So, George, what I'm saying is this. I am saying to them, right, you get your house in order in every sense, deliver us a Brexit that is recognisable for what we voted for. If you don't, then I will lead the Brexit Party, the new Brexit Party, into those European elections, and you will get the biggest electoral shock we've ever seen in this country.
And your slogan will be, tell them again.
Tell them again is the idea that I'm currently working on. And you know, why not? Tell them again. But this time do it louder and do it even bigger than before. And if we do that, and if I'm right, that in a context of that European election, we will see literally an electoral revolution against the established Labour and Conservative parties, then I think at least we will stop them ever trying to force a second referendum upon us. I believe that we will get Brexit. I think the genie is out of the bottle. I just think there are some more big battles to fight first.
If I may, here's my advice.
Yeah.
Keep it as a one-issue party. Don't be right-wing, don't be left-wing. Don't get drawn into having a view on transgenderism or gay rights or any of the rest of the political furniture. Just be single-minded, absolutely focused on making sure that what we voted for is implemented. That's my advice, Nige.
Well, I tell you what, I take it 100% and I agree with it. This is the most important question of our generation. Are we to be a country that makes its own decisions or governed by Mr. Juncker, who even before lunch isn't very good and after lunch is absolutely useless? You know, it's the whole idea.
Before breakfast.
Well, probably in his case, that's true. But I mean, the idea that the big decisions that affect people in our country and our future are made by folk we can't elect, we can't remove, whose names we barely even know, it's an outrage. You know, I'm not harking back to days of empire or anything else, but we are a United Kingdom with the fifth biggest economy in the world. We speak the language that is the international business language and social language of the world. You know, I actually still think we are a great country. It's just our leaders don't believe in us, but we do believe in us. We're going to get there. Believe me, I'm totally confident. Whatever they throw at us, whether it's a European election or a second referendum, do you know what? If we have to do it again, we'll win it next time by an even bigger margin.
Best of luck to you, Nigel Farage. Thanks for coming on the show. Nigel Farage, the leader of the new Brexit Party, former leader of UKIP, which has gone awry. He's now set up something else. And I'm telling you, as I told you last Friday, this will fly. What a beautiful voice, Nat King Cole, whose death anniversary we mark. Born in 1919, died on this day in 1965. And that was Nature Boy, which leads me gently, thanks to the brilliance of my team behind the glass, into our next subject, which is what happened to all the insects. My wife might be listening and she thinks I'm 45, but I'm actually a little bit older than 45. And so when I was young, there were insects in profusion. There were earwigs, forky-tailies we called them, everywhere. There were beetles, there were butterflies, there were birds, there were starlings, there were thrush, there were sparrows, there were robins. There were insects in magnificent profusion, and now there are not. And I'm going to be talking to Professor Dave Goulson of the School of Life Sciences at the University of Sussex on the story that the world is losing its insect population and that will have a dire impact on life on Earth, just as much as the increase in temperature that the school children were protesting about today. These two things may be connected, or they may be a result. This disappearance may be the result of the way that we farm, the way that we garden. It may be in connection to the exploitation of the earth on which we have been embarked now for the last couple of centuries, and we may just have reached tipping point in which things which are vital to us, not just in terms of biodiversity, but psychologically. I told the story at the top of the show. I literally came upon a group of sparrows the other day, and I had to explain to my small children what they were, because they had never seen them before. And one thing is connected to another, isn't it? If one thing goes down, another thing may be brought down by that thing going down. Do you get the picture I'm trying to paint here? If we don't pay attention to the disappearance of bees, there are a whole generation of children that have never been stung by a bee. I used to get stung by a bee every week throughout the whole summer because there were so many bees, and now there aren't. A friend of mine, Chris Turner in Manchester, the Bolshevik beekeeper he is on Twitter, he took me to see his bees in a hive the other day. Absolutely magnificent, fascinating creatures disappearing. And when they disappear, there's no one, there's nothing to take the pollen from one flower to another, from one flower to another plant. And eventually, all around us begins to die. Is that really what we want for our children and their children and their children? Really? None of us would willfully allow our children to walk into the road because it's our job to protect them. It's deeply ingrained in us that that's our primary duty in life. But there's no point in protecting them from a passing vehicle if all around us we're doing nothing about changes to our planet, to our environment, that are destroying that which will be their life, their earth, their world in future generations. I'm not there. I'm not an expert. But my guest is. He's Professor Dave Goulson, as I said, and he joins us now. Professor, thank you for joining us.
That's my pleasure, George.
Can you sketch out for us what the scale of this is, and then we'll get into what might be behind it?
The scale of the declines, it's pretty terrifying, actually. There's been a lot of studies come out fairly recently, perhaps the best known of which was one from Germany, which showed that basically the insect abundance in Germany had dropped by 75% in about 26 years. So three-quarters of the insects.
Yes. Did you say 75%?
Yeah, 75%
Wow.
in between 1989 and 2014. So really not very long. You know, most of us can remember 1989 pretty well. It wasn't that long ago, it seems to me.
Yeah.
But there were
And
apparently
is
a lot more
that's in
insect-
Germany. Is there any reason to believe it's any different here?
Not really, no. We've got good data for butterflies and moths, and some data for bees from the UK. And although the declines aren't quite as dramatic as the German ones show, they nonetheless are all pointing in the same direction. You know, in fact, from around the world, there's a number of studies suggesting that this is a global phenomenon, that basically insects are in pretty rapid decline around the world.
And what are the most obvious consequences, and what are the most long-lasting consequences of this?
Well, so insects make up the bulk of life on Earth. About 2/3 of all the species we know of are insects, and they're kind of integral to everything, to the way ecosystems function. So probably the best known thing that they do is they pollinate. The majority of plant species, roughly 80% of plant species, depend on insects to pollinate them. So if they're not pollinated, they won't set any seeds. They'll disappear. So that's most of the plant species on Earth. And 3/4 of the crops we grow need pollinating. So we are directly dependent on insects, but they do a bunch of other stuff too. They're food for most birds, lizards, bats, frogs, and so on. They recycle animal dung, they recycle dead bodies, they keep the soil healthy, they control predators, they do all sorts of stuff. Control pests, I should have said. If the insects disappear, basically, we are in big trouble ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, as you adumbrate the importance of insects, the immediate conclusion that one reaches that this is actually an emergency. How did it happen, and what can we do to reverse it?
Well, so there's a lot of debate about what's driving it, but I think most of us agree that the biggest part of it is sort of habitat loss, that we used to have lots of hay meadows full of flowers and woodlands and hedgerows and so on, and a lot of that was swept away. Modern farming with big monocultures of crops are not at all friendly. Essentially, we've made a lot of the landscape hostile to wildlife, particularly insects. And an integral part of that is we use an awful lot of pesticides. Each year, UK farmers apply, if I remember correctly, 16.9 thousand tons of pesticides to the UK landscape. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that our insects are in decline. Climate change also
I was
seems
going to
to be
ask you that.
starting.
Is climate change a factor in this?
Yeah, the evidence is mixed, but there was a recent study actually from as far away as Puerto Rico where they found big insect declines there, and they're attributing that to climate change more than anything else. I think in the UK, as yet, climate change probably hasn't had enormous effects. But if climate change takes place on the scale that's projected, then it undoubtedly will have enormous impacts on British wildlife into the future.
And what can we do about this? Or are we too late, Dave?
We're not too late. We have to try and be positive. And anything we can do to make things better, is a step in the right direction. And we absolutely cannot give up. So, there's kind of two areas to this. One is it would be great if we could make farming more sustainable and wildlife friendly. That's a tricky one to tackle and more controversial. There's a lot of argument about how we should do that. What's easier to tackle is, and something everyone can get involved in, is making our gardens and our towns and cities into wildlife friendly places, insect friendly places, giant insect nature reserves, if you like. And there's lots of things we can do. I would say to people, please don't use insecticides in your gardens. There's lots of information available about what plants you can grow in your garden that will provide lots of nectar and pollen for butterflies and bees and so on. You can put up a bee hotel if you want to really go to town. And if we could get our local councils on board so that our parks are managed in wildlife friendly ways, leaving meadow areas, planting the right kinds of flowers, not using pesticides, and adding road verges, roundabouts, there's lots of scope for turning our cities into giant nature reserves. And wouldn't that be cool? Yes,
and it all seems so obvious. One wonders why nobody has done it. Who's in charge of this in the government? I don't mean this particular government, but in all governments. Is this Minister for the Environment, Farming?
Yeah, what? Right now, I guess Michael Gove is the guy in the frame, and he is, to be fair to him, making lots of good noises. But we're sort of still waiting for him to really follow through in full on those. But he does seem to be quite engaged.
We'll try and get him on for next week to talk about that. Now, just finally, because the line's not great, Professor, you're an expert on bees. I'm very interested in bees, and it's bees that I notice missing most of all. Bees and butterflies. I'm not a great lover of earwigs and beetles, but I am a great lover of butterflies and bees. What happened to them? The same thing?
Yeah, the same thing. I mean, particularly for bees, bees obviously need flowers, and we used to have about 7 million acres of hay meadows full of flowers in Britain, going back 80 years or so. We swept away all but 2% of our hay meadows in the 20th century, so we basically got rid of all the flowers. And if you go for a walk in modern farmland, you generally don't see much in the way of flowers. And obviously that's all their food gone. So yeah, I mean that's essentially why bees have become more scarce.
How do we set up this bee hotel you mentioned? I'll set one up.
Okay, you can buy bee hotels if you want to. Just go on the internet, you'll find one in about 5 seconds, or you can make one. So for nothing, if you've got a drill and a piece of wood, or some bamboo canes. Basically, they just need some holes, horizontal holes in a piece of wood, 8, 9, 10 millimeters diameter, something like that. So get yourself a lump of wood, drill as many holes in it as you can, and hang it up on a south-facing sunny wall or fence. And with a bit of luck, in a few weeks' time, you'll have little mason bees moving in to nest.
Well, that sounds like something we can all do, or those of us that have got a garden. It's a terrific idea. But generally, everyone needs to mobilise. I mean, that number you gave of a 75% fall in the abundance of insects from 1989, well, at this rate, they'll all be gone quite soon in the lifetime of the people listening to this. And what then?
Well, so actually, they won't all be gone. Some of them are really super tough, adaptable pests. I think things like houseflies and cockroaches and so on will be around long after us humans are gone. But the sad thing is that we'll lose all the really beautiful insects and the ones that we really want to keep, the butterflies and the bees and the dragonflies and so on, which would obviously be tragic.
Tragic indeed. I'm really grateful for this interview, Dave. I don't often say that, and I even less often mean it. But I genuinely have found it a pleasure talking to you. We'll get you into the studio sometime so we can improve the quality of the conversation. Thank you for that. Professor Dave Goulson of the School of Life Sciences at the University of Sussex. Now, a lot of people are texting, even ringing in about the case of the ISIS bride Shamima Begum. I didn't deal with it in the beginning and hadn't really intended to today for a variety of reasons. First of all, I think the story is pretty extremely overhyped, and secondly, I didn't actually want to have to wade into waters that will place me and by extension talk radio in any difficulty, because you know my views on how we got ISIS. You know my views on who and what ISIS really are. You know, I think my views, if you follow me on other platforms, on Syria and the war there. And at this moment, in this climate, it's not good for me on this platform to go there. But by popular demand, let me tell you what I think. First of all, this woman is, on the face of it, a criminal. She voluntarily went to participate in a regime over a piece of territory the size of Wales, traversing the Syrian and Iraqi borders from Aleppo to Mosul, in two countries very important to me, Syria and Iraq. And she was therefore aiding and abetting the most satanic death cult that it has ever been my horror to gaze upon in my lifetime. It is abundantly clear that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the alphabet soup of Islamist extremism is the darkest of forces, and therefore for any British citizen to go there voluntarily and to cavort as an adornment to that evil has almost certainly broken the law. But she remains a British citizen, and she has the mitigating factor of being pregnant with her third child. And therefore my position is this: it would be neither lawful nor moral to refuse to allow her to return to her family in England and to treatment by the National Health Service. After all, the alternative is to leave her to give birth in the very difficult circumstances in which she now finds herself. But it's also my view that she should be prosecuted. Moreover, that every person who returned from their adventures with the Satanists should have been prosecuted. In fact, I've said many times, it is simply beyond comprehension for me that hundreds of male, fighting-age males have been allowed to re-enter this country without being prosecuted. Never mind a pregnant female who presumably was not actually out there cutting people's throats and cutting their heads off, who arrived there as an immature, foolish, misguided, misled fool. But she should face the music. But she should face it here. That's my view. And two people are on the line with a different view. Let me take them in the order in which they appear. I have no idea what their view is. Daniel is in Manchester. He's up first. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, Daniel Adamstow, mate.
Hello, Daniel.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, as usual, you word things in the way that you do, and I agree with you on what you say. I mean, one thing I would add to it is she was 15 when she left, and there is a question mark on how 3 15-year-olds are able to just leave the country. I would
exactly.
With
how did she get through the airport?
Well, can I add something here? I mean, I don't know your thoughts on Tony Goslin.
Yeah, I know him. He's a journalist, yeah.
Yes. Well, he wrote an article about, because there was a hype, wasn't there, of this jihadi bride nonsense. It wasn't just them. There was quite a few. It was quite a popular thing at the time.
Yes.
And he wrote an article when she and those two other girls left. And I would encourage yourself and other people to read that article.
Yeah, I will do. I will do.
George, please, I know because I digress and ramble on, but how you speak is something to be... I aspire, I wish I could be able to do what you do, okay? Because you so easy you could go down the route of degrading and making people, just doing the horrible roundabout thing. But you don't do that, and that is something that I wish more people could do, and I certainly wish that I was able to do.
Well, I'm very grateful for that, Daniel. It's quite a touching compliment, and I'm grateful to you, and I will read that article. Let's hear now from Margot in Bethenham. Have I got that right, Margot?
Yes, you have.
Where's
Hello
Bethenham?
there.
I've never heard that before. Where is it?
Beckenham? Beckenham is in Kent, but it could be London, because it's actually the largest borough in London.
Oh, really?
Believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah.
It's my bad. On you go, Margot. Tell me what you think.
Beggar's belief. Jihadis, whatever clothing they wear, they cover themselves up. They wear these long robes. We're all led to believe that she lost 2 children. I don't know where that came from, and where's the proof. But also, she obviously went over there. She was underage. She had sex. Okay, fine, that's illegal. But we still don't know that she actually had those.
It's not illegal for her. It would be illegal for the person having sex with her, yeah.
Yeah, but did she actually have those children? But
what would that have to do with it, Margot?
No, well, obviously, The third child, apparently she is pregnant with, she would have been in a consented. She would have been.
She was married. She was married.
Right.
To a jihadist.
Okay.
She went out to get married to a jihadist.
Yeah, but okay. But do we actually know that that third child is from the same father as the other two?
Well, again, I'm asking you, what's that got to do with it?
No, all I'm saying is, do we actually know that she's pregnant at all?
Only from the journalist who interviewed her in the Times.
Exactly, but did he...
She's 9 months pregnant. I think it's difficult to hide.
In the clothing they wear, I don't know. But at the end of the day, if I was a mother myself and I found this out, I would be... If I knew my daughter had gone over there, okay, and I then found that she was alive, I'm a mother, I'd be crowdfunding. I'd be getting myself, I'd be sorting, I mean, obviously, you know, I'd be getting her home myself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's what our family are trying to do, aren't they?
Are they? I don't know. All they're doing is they're getting the government to pay for them to go and find her and bring her back. But as I'm a mother, I'd be out there. I'd be searching for her.
She can come back on. She can come back on her own. I mean, all of these things are extraneous to the heart of this matter, Margot. Should she be allowed back into the country? Is the question.
No, I think she's a cell.
You think what?
I think she's a cell. She's to come back over here to start a cell.
But given you don't know who she was married to, whether she was ever pregnant, if she's now pregnant, how do you know she's a cell?
No, I just feel that she's been... that whole interview was contrived. It was absolutely... She should not come back to this country. She's danger to this country.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that are a danger to the country, and some of them are actually running the country. We've got to defend ourselves, including against these Islamist fanatics. And I think everyone who went to join them should have been prosecuted when they came back. But unfortunately, they weren't. Hundreds of them have already been allowed into the country. One of these people blew up all our children in the Manchester Arena at the Ariana Grande concert. That was a person who was training with Al-Qaeda in Libya with the government's knowledge and was allowed back in to commit mass murder of children in Manchester. So there are a lot of dangers to the country and we must guard against them. The question is, how do you stop? And is it legal or moral or both to stop this particular girl from coming back?
I believe she's their last resort. Now, I feel as if they're closing down, they're losing strength. And all of a sudden they've found this British #woman in their camp. They are using her as a weapon to get back into the UK.
But they've already sent hundreds of males back, and they're already in the UK.
No, but this is publicised, isn't it? But what I don't understand is if she is pregnant, that child is half British. It's not British. It shouldn't be allowed. She shouldn't be allowed in England.
But she's English.
She's English, but the baby isn't.
You want to leave the baby there in the desert?
No, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is if that was my daughter, I'd be going out there to find her myself.
Well, I'm not quite sure what your point is. Is it that the mother is not already out there looking for her in the desert? Or is it that the girl should be allowed back or not? I'm just asking you this, Margot. I'm a father of 5 children myself. Yeah. I don't know about you.
I've got one child.
All right, but
if she went out off and disappeared over there...
Yeah, you'd go and get her, wouldn't you? And you'd bring her back.
I'd bring her back.
Yeah.
I'd go
and what would you say to those that called up radio stations and said she shouldn't be allowed back? What would you say to them?
I'd go and find her and bring her back.
Yeah, but what about those that phoned up radio stations, as you're doing now, and said, we shouldn't allow your daughter back?
I'd stay with her.
In the desert, in a war.
No, but at the end of the day, she's my daughter. I'd want to be with my daughter.
Exactly. And your grandchild, half British or not. Margot, I'm going to leave it there, and I now realise you're from Beckenham, not what it says on my screen, Bethenham, which was the reason for the confusion at the beginning. Thanks very much for that call. Let's take a break. Now, Dandy Warthall says, George Galloway and Nigel Farage, they are both egotistical, self-centred megalomaniacs, neither of whom should be elevated to positions of power. Well, thanks for listening, Dandy. And I've never been elevated to anything in my life. I was elected 6 times, actually, to Parliament in 3 cities, in 2 countries. Who knows? Maybe one day I will be again. John's on the line from Nottingham, and he wants to talk about this insect story, and I'm glad he does. John, welcome.
Hi, George. All right?
Yeah, good. Tell me, what do you think?
Well, it's not what I think, George. It's what I look at online and on social media, and there's old strands of information now about this problem, which is never discussed on mainstream media. So tonight is the first time maybe we'll start talking about it. Mm-hmm. We've all noticed that trees are being chopped down on our streets and next to houses, and they're being replaced with cell towers, basically. So they're chopping trees down, they're putting mobile phone towers up on street corners. I'm no expert on this, so you need a scientist to give you more information, but these cell towers communicate with mobile phones via microwaves, EMFs or RF radio signals. Now, there's a strand of information that correlates the loss of birds and bees with the sort of onset and the rise of mobile phone usage over the last decade or 20 years, which actually correlates with the information that the scientists just talked about.
Yes, it does, yeah.
Birds and bees were looking in the last 20 years. So you don't have to be an expert to join the dots. Look at the technology of the last 20 years and the decline of insects in the last 20 years, and the fact that we're in a sea of Wi-Fi and mobile phone pollution now. And there are some sort of information strands online that actually say that it's not just affecting birds and bees, it's starting to affect human beings. And the scary thing about it, I don't want to go too much down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, George, but we've just got to look at the fact that we're all being told that 50% of us will get cancer. And we get cancer adverts like getting cancer is like a cold. And they're normalising cancer. So is there something a little bit deeper going on here? I don't even like to think about it, George, because I've just got a new grandchild, and I know you've got young children. And sometimes I really get frightened to think of the world that they're going to be growing up in if this technology that they're selling to children, and let's face it, children now have got serious mobile phone addictions, and that mobile phone is a small microwave device, and it's just very scary. I mean, you're a dad of young kids. I mean, are you happy for your kids to get addicted to mobile phones?
Well, one of them already is, but let me categorically state that there's no evidence at all that mobile phones give you cancer. But let me ask you a question, John. The old song, where did all the flowers go? It puzzles me a little because, where I grew up and when I grew up, hardly anybody had gardens. We didn't have gardens until we were into the 1960s. But now, a huge percentage of us have gardens. What, do we not have any flowers in those gardens? And what's the point of a garden that doesn't have any flowers in it? In what way have our flowers disappeared? That's one question that struck me when the professor was talking.
Lots of things have disappeared. I mean, this can sort of blend into lots of other things. Even that you've talked about tonight about people whistling. Now, I associate people whistling with happy people.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Maybe
I
we're
don't-
just not happy enough to whistle.
Well, this is it, George. I mean, I don't see the technology that they're forcing on us is making us happier.
No, it's certainly not. John, that's a very good point to end on. Your line, despite the mobile phone mast proliferation, is beginning to go. Peter in Glasgow says, convinced now that Theresa must be a weeble. That's Weeble. Must be a weeble. They wobble, but they don't fall down. Brilliant, Peter, as always. Now, Gigi, if leaving the EU is not achieved, I'll be voting for Nigel, says David Leviscont. The other parties have betrayed the people they claim to represent. I think Nigel Farage is on to a future if that were to happen. George, I used to detest you, but down the years listening to you, I've changed my view. I don't agree entirely with you, but respect you more than almost any politician. I've lost so much faith. Your defence of Churchill is absolutely spot on. Saving the world from fascism gives him a pass on other misdemeanours. I also respect anyone who's friends with people who are on the opposite side of the political spectrum. That's from Steve in Stoke. I don't think it gives you a pass, Steve, but every man and woman's life has to be weighed in the balance, as indeed it will be by the Almighty on the Judgment Day. And for those of us here and now, we have to evaluate honestly the significance of people and what they did and didn't do when they could do it. And the facts of the matter are that Winston Churchill was responsible for enormous crimes, most of them not in this country, most of them in Bengal, in Ireland, and in other places, like Iraq, for example, where he was the first man to drop chemical weapons on Iraqis, not the last, of course, but the first. And he said in Parliament that he couldn't understand the squeamishness of the House of using poison gas against primitive tribes. This was a man who was a white supremacist, who was an empire fanatic, who believed that the white man was superior to all others, and that the British white man superior to all the other white men. These are all very serious charges. But if he had not stepped forward in 1940, if he had surrendered to Adolf Hitler when Hitler's armies were at the Channel ports, and when all around him, in the palace, in the city, in the Parliament, in the cabinet, were desperately trying to force him to surrender to Hitler, to make a deal with Hitler, to surrender this country to Hitler. If he had not been there, if he had not stood up and insisted, it's not that, as I often joke, we'd be having this conversation in German rather than in English, though that is quite likely to be true. That's the least of it. It's this. It's that no Jew would be left alive on the earth because Hitler would have exterminated all of them. It's that every gay man, gay woman presumably, that they could have gotten their hands on would have been exterminated. It's that every gypsy, every Jehovah, every communist, every socialist, every dissident, it's that every person who did not fit the maniacal, racist ideology of fascism, of Hitlerism, would have been exterminated. No freedom would exist upon the earth, certainly upon the occupied earth. All of Europe, from Russia to Portugal, and including us, would have been occupied by Nazism. Now, as I said earlier, I can't put it better, I don't think. He was a villain, indeed a monster, for much of his life. But for a moment, an historical moment, he was a hero. And it turns out that that moment was the most important moment of the entire history of these islands. To the ends of the earth, is that where we're all hurtling? Are we doomed? 0344 499 1000. Tell me what you think. You can email also through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text the word talk followed by your message to 87222, though that will cost you 25 pence plus normal charges. You can tweet for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Let's go to Linda in Market Harborough. Linda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to speak to you, George. I normally listen to you from Australia, but I'm over in the UK at the moment.
Oh, wow. Excellent to hear from you.
I can interact live now, so that's great. The reason I contacted you initially was because I was getting a bit fed up that you were reading out text from climate deniers.
Yeah. I mean, we read out every text that we can, but obviously we're happy to take the other view, because the other view has the benefit of being scientifically the truth. And scientifically, there is climate change, no doubt at all about that.
Yeah, it's fact. And we haven't got time to be wasting time on these idiots that are denying it. And you've had a really interesting show where I'm really pleased that you're talking about all the interconnected issues, like the loss of insects.
Yes. Quite alarming, isn't it?
It's very shocking indeed. And soil erosion is going to be an issue as well. And that's been caused by all the extreme weather events caused by our action, burning fossil fuel and heating up the planet. So all the things are interconnected, unfortunately. But I'm hoping that Jeremy Corbyn might take some action, because he did tweet a lot of support today for the youth climate strikers.
Yes. It's not something that one country alone can do, though, is it?
Well, no, that's true. And Australia is not helping.
No.
And
you've had the most extreme weather in your history out there. New South Wales was in drought for a very long period.
During winter.
Yeah, well, during our winter, your summer, no?
Well, but they were in drought during our winter.
Wow.
Our winter in Australia.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how bad it was.
That's even more extraordinary.
Yes.
I suppose the only point I'm making is it wouldn't do, I think, to imagine that Jeremy Corbyn could solve this problem. But, I mean, some of the points that the professor was making are easily solved. We could have a national effort to replant flowers. We can have a national effort to use less pesticides, particularly in gardens where there's no conceivable reason for them. Weeding your garden is part of having a garden. There are plenty of things we can do about having proper...
You were talking about individuals, and I've been doing the right thing for as long as I possibly can as an individual. But
I'm talking about the state. For example, the state could say that every roundabout has to be planted. With flowers. That would A, be beautiful, and B, be helping the bees. I mean, there are lots of things that a single country, a single local authority can do, and there are lots of things that individuals can also do that they're not doing.
Well, that's true, but I think the government needs to get on a warlike footing and pull together a panel of people to oversee things, to make sure that we take urgent action. We've really got to decarbonise the economy, and the biodiversity loss is also part of the issue. It's kind of shifting the way that we all work. The consumerism has to change. We have to start to unconsume, don't we? We can't go on consuming the way that we do. And I'm hoping that because you're becoming more open to talking about things, and we're listening to you, learning all about it, you can hear the shock in your voice when you're learning the facts.
Yeah, 75%. Since 1989, I think the whole listenership must have been shocked by that.
Yes, for sure.
Except people like you that already knew. Are you involved with your work in this field, or are you a gifted amateur?
I'm just an interested amateur, and I do a lot of environmental activism in Australia because the Australians are trying to open up yet another coal mine in Queensland. And it's a very great issue at the moment, the Adani coal mine. And we're trying to stop Adani. And just from getting involved in that campaign, I've come into contact with lots of different environmental issues. And it is very, very shocking. And the urgency of the need to change can't be underestimated.
Quite so. Well, you've helped us press the alarm button tonight, Linda. Thanks for doing it, and safe journey back to Australia. Tommy says, I think maybe we're using too many pesticides and destroying our ecosystem, but I watched Prime Minister's questions this week, and suddenly I thought, that reminds me, I must get some slug pellets. The Communicipalist says, seems clear to me, George, the UK represents a greater existential threat to the EU inside the Union than it does outside of it. Any delay in Brexit will mean, after May's European elections, the Brexit Party will ensure a Eurosceptic majority in the European Parliament. And Will Carpenter says, poles apart politically on most areas, but share some striking similarities. Both have passionate supporters, vociferous opponents, and both seem more in tune with the public than the vast majority of the Westminster cliques should be good. That was a reference to my then upcoming discussion with Nigel Farage. Thank you for that, Will. Georgie says, it's all very well to be civilised with people who support Tory policy, but does your guest not recognise that Tory and Fib Dem coalition before them have plunged millions of us into poverty, destitution and worse? I'd love to go to the movies, but... Tell you what, Georgie, I'll take you to the pictures. The Red Resistance says, I know Nat King Cole didn't write his lyrics, but the most poignant line from any of his songs was in Nature Boy, when he beautifully delivered the following wise words. The greatest gift you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. I was singing that this very evening. Ella says, did you mention you're planning your own version of Question Time? That would be fab. It could be called A Time to Question with George Galloway. Yes, in this summer of 2019, I will be broadcasting Answer Time. Not Question Time, but Answer Time. Stay tuned for more information. Squid says Steve should care about the prospect of a hard border. It violates the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. Is Mr. Norris proposing to continue Britain's tradition of violating its agreements? I think he was doing the opposite, actually. He was saying that there must and can be no hard border between the Republic and the 6 counties, and that until the 6 counties returns to Ireland, then electronically we can have a border. So I don't think you should hold him guilty of that charge. It's been an amazing 2 hours, I think. Fantastic radio. The good news is there's still another hour to come. Now, I mentioned earlier that I felt that Donald Trump had crossed a line, or a Rio Grande, as I put it. The stream of consciousness he delivered today on the subject of his wall was unhinged even by Trumpian standards. He said that the wall will be tougher to climb than Mount Everest. He said that the United States was being invaded by Latin America when the literal opposite is currently being threatened. Now, you know my view, I've said it many times. If the United States wants to build a wall along any of its borders or all of its borders, they're fully entitled to do so. But the people of the United States have to calibrate the cost in every sense of that. Such is the lack of popularity of that wall that the United States Congress just changed hands, and the majority of the elected politicians in the land think that it's a very bad idea to proceed with it. So Donald declared a state of emergency. That's where the United States stands today. Do you want to go on holiday to a place that's in a state of emergency? Do you want to entrust your future to the leadership of a country that is in a state of emergency? If you've got relatives there, are you slightly anxious about them in this state of emergency? Let's hear from Professor Peter Shane from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who is the chair in law at the Ohio State University. I've spoken there, actually, on the subject of Donald Trump and his wall. Professor, thank you for joining us.
It's a privilege to be with you. I'm trying to restrain my laughter. Your presentation was terrific.
Oh, thank you. I made it up on the cusp, I can tell you. But it's how I feel about it.
Yeah. I would just correct two details. One is I'm calling you from Columbus. You're talking to me in Columbus, Ohio.
I beg your pardon.
I used to live in Pittsburgh, but that's where Ohio State is.
Okay.
And the second thing is we are not actually in a state of emergency. What President Trump did, wisely or not, is declare a national emergency under a statute called the National Emergencies Act. But there's no kind of broad-based, free-floating presidential power that gets activated by that.
No, but the words are similar, and the impression given is identical. I can assure you, in the world. I mean, if I learned that the most powerful country on the earth and the richest country on the earth is in a national emergency, there's not much difference in that from being in a state of emergency. First of all, Professor, is this even legal, what he's done?
So that should have a yes or no answer, right? So,
I appreciate we're not paying your legal fees here.
Right. So, first of all, again, just to go back to the state of emergency thing for a second.
Yeah.
We actually have 31 national emergencies all declared in the United States at the moment. When a president declares a national emergency, that doesn't do anything by itself. It simply triggers some other statutory power that an agency has to do something. So if there's a national emergency about the use of opioids, then the Public Health Service gets to do certain things. So whether the president, could legally issue his declaration, that's a debatable point. But what's really going to be fought about is not the declaration itself, but the powers that he thinks can be exercised once the declaration is issued.
Particularly the money, isn't it, Professor? I mean, he's arrogated to himself the power to take billions of dollars and build a wall.
Correct. So what he hopes to happen, so just to give you an example, there's a statute that says when there is a national emergency declared that requires the use of the armed forces, the Secretary of Defense can basically move money from other projects if that is necessary to support the armed forces. Now, the real question is whether that statute actually applies to building a wall. And I think the answer is no, and that's going to be fought out in court.
Who'll take it to court?
There are a number of possibilities. So under our Constitution, the power of the purse is the most important power that the legislative branch has over the executive. And so the House of Representatives may bring suit to argue that by using money in a way that Congress has never authorized, the president is basically injuring Congress, and therefore they have standing to challenge the president in court. The other possibility, once we know where he's transferring the money from, is that people who are going to lose out because of those transfers, maybe somebody had, some community was going to get a new shipyard, or they were going to, revamp some military base, and that money is being turned over to the wall instead. Maybe they would have standing to sue. And of course, most of the land that the wall would be built on is in private hands. So the people whose land would have to be condemned through eminent domain to build the wall, they could also sue.
Now, your dog's barking in alarm at the possibility of all this, I can hear. Just so you know where I'm coming from before I put my next point to you, I was not happy that Donald Trump became the president of the United States, but I was very happy that Hillary Clinton didn't. So I'm not coming at this from some kind of crazed liberal hatred of Trump. My point is this, though. When I saw and heard him today, I felt that we were looking and hearing from someone not fully in control of their faculties. The mental health of the president was placed in question to me. I wonder if there's any echo of that in the United States, because this is a very powerful guy. And he's been quite zany throughout the whole of the term so far. But this just seemed to me to be, well, disappearing down the rabbit hole. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, opining on the president's mental health goes beyond my expertise as a law professor. But the sentiment that you're expressing is widely held over here, and it's, of course, quite alarming. I don't know. There's not. I actually said on Twitter today that I wasn't sure I'd ever heard any other presidential speech both as whiny and divisive as what the president said today, and basically that people responding said, unless you read all of the speeches, picking out the one that is the most rambling and incoherent just isn't fair.
Yeah, I get that. And I've often, of course, gasped in amazement at the things that he said. But when a president of the United States says that this wall will be tougher to climb than Mount Everest, I mean, if your child said that, you'd tell them not to be so silly.
Well, and as you say, yes, and he obviously exaggerates, he prevaricates all the time. What is most noxious, though, is not the Mount Everest lie, but the idea that the United States is somehow being invaded by sex traffickers, drug lords, and
killers and rapists and so on.
Killers and rapists. And right now, the members of Congress who actually live on the border, including a fellow named Will Hurd, he's the congressman for the El Paso area. He's a Republican. He is a guy who worked for the CIA for 10 years. He's not exactly a softie in terms of his concerns about national security. And he is just steadfastly opposed to the wall. He thinks it's a ridiculous proposal. And, yet the president believes that I think it's in his political interest to scare his base. And to play on people's fears and maybe biases about who's actually coming across the border.
And is it playing to his base? Is his base responding? It's a declining base by all accounts in the opinion polls and in the recent elections. But let me read you a tweet I've just got on this from Dippers. I'm enjoying your programme, but not the Trump bashing. You are distorting what he's doing and the nature of the state of emergency. We've got enough going on here without commenting on the USA, who, by the way, voted Trump in and will again. Will it, Professor, in your view?
It's just too early to tell. Anybody whose crystal ball gives them a 2-year advance notice is... has stronger batteries than mine.
Well, good point, and circumspect. Finally, then, I'm grateful for your time. He fully anticipated today that this matter will go to the courts. He talked about the circuit that it will first appear in, and they'll get a bad result, then they'll get another bad result, but that it will go to the Supreme Court. Is this where the value of stuffing the Supreme Court with the most right-wing judges that one can find will provide a victory for Trump here?
Well, that is undoubtedly his hope. I just think that, particularly with regard to Chief Justice Roberts, who, is ordinarily protective of presidential power, I just don't assume that they, notwithstanding, the case involving the travel ban, I don't assume that he will necessarily uphold the authority of the Defense Department or the Treasury Department to use the statutory authorities that they have in national emergencies. I mean, after all, one of the more remarkable things that the president said today, and I'm quoting now, is he said, "I didn't need to do this. I just wanted to do it much faster. The only reason we're up here talking about this is because of the election." Well, if this is a national emergency, how do you reconcile it with that?
I didn't need to do this.
Prose?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't need to do it. I mean, we have a situation where, he forced the premature exit of his defense secretary. We have a national emergency involving national security. He has not actually nominated a successor. I mean, how serious an emergency could it be? And with reference to the fellow who tweeted at you that you are, distorting what the president is doing, when these statements are made, the follow-up question I always want to ask is, could you be specific about that? In what way have you, the host, or have I, the guest, distorted what the president has done? Because I believe we've been completely accurate.
Yes, and often his performances are beyond parody. I'm not seeking to parody them because it's quite impossible. Anyone who understands the English language heard what they heard today and can only marvel at it and sympathise with you, our American friends, in the grip of it all. What timescale, finally, Professor? What timescale are we on here? Can he not procure this money until the entire legal process is considered? In which case, how long would that be?
Well, it's unclear. It depends on whether or not an injunction is issued that would stop the movement of money before the resolution of this case. Of course, it is still possible that Congress could, I think this is improbable, but Congress could, rise up and pass a statute that prohibits the transfer of funds or cancels the national emergency altogether. They have that power. And if they had any self-respect institutionally, they would do it and do it by an overwhelming vote that would overcome the president's veto. But partisanship, may just prevent that from happening.
Very interesting. I'm really grateful to you, Professor. Sorry?
Can I tell you quickly the two things that I'm most worried about?
Yes, do.
One thing I'm worried about, of course, is whether our institutions can withstand, this assault on normal governance. I'm also worried about how long it will take after Trump has left office to restore the rest of the world's confidence in the United States, because I don't blame any country in the world right now that wonders, what the heck are we doing?
Well, quite so. I'm grateful to you, Professor. Thanks for coming on board. Professor Peter Shane, who is chair in law at the Ohio State University. Thanks very much for joining us.
Flash, bang, alakazam, wonderful you came by.
That moment. I hope you all one day get to experience that. The great Nat King Cole. Somebody's just tweeted that I'm off the boil tonight. Am I being censored or controlled? I thought I was on fire, actually. I thought the show was really above par myself. Let's hear from a caller who's always above par. He's John in Camden. Go ahead, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, George. How are you?
I'm good, yes. I'm enjoying it.
I'd like to talk to you about the revelations this week that were obtained by a Freedom of Information Act that the former Mayor of London and the dishonourable member for Uxbridge wasted £53 million of London taxpayers' money on the Garden Bridge project.
I was gobsmacked by that number. Were you?
It was just I had heard about it. I was kind of a bit more in the know, but when it became public knowledge and the full timeline of events, if you don't mind me telling.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Tell us how you can spend £53 million not building something.
Well, the Garden Bridge project, a new bridge was to be commissioned over the River Thames. And like everything else, it has to be put out in the form of a public consultation. Well, this was done in the form of a competition where people could enter to see which was the bridge that was going to be chosen. Well, this was pre-decided. This was Joanna Lumley's pet project of having a bridge across the River Thames. And in this freedom of information came this letter full of flowery, absolutely fabulous language between Boris Johnson and Joanna Lumley. Dear Boris, thank you for the tulips. It's wonderful that we have been chosen to this when they haven't actually done it officially. Now, also, the designers and the builders of this bridge, that also has to be put out for public tender, but that was also pre-decided that the people that were going to design and build it were Ove Arab architects, where lo and behold, the director of Ove Arab architects was a former member of the Bullingdon Club at the same time as Boris Johnson. Now, I understand how much architects' fees, consultants' fees, lawyers' fees, etc., cost. They are not cheap. But £53 million. This particular guy, who is the chairman of Ove Arab Architect, personally trousered £2 million of London taxpayers' money. Johnson was throwing public money around like it was confetti. They didn't even decide where they were going to build it, let alone lay a brick. First of all, it was going to be at Lambeth. Then the river was too wide. Then they were going to do it downriver at Blackfriars. But no, that wasn't going to be right because the arches of the bridge to support all of the living organisms. Let's not forget, there were going to be living organisms, trees, redwood trees, a jungle over the River Thames. And in the end, the cost of it just got so ridiculous that Sadiq Khan pulled the plug on it.
Hundreds of thousands of pounds were spent on a website.
Yeah, exactly.
How can you spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on a website? How is that even possible?
Well, this hopefully is all going to come out in the fullness of time. Now, you sent a tweet out this week of how is he not arrested for this? £53 million was squandered by basically Boris Johnson writing checks to people.
Hey, let me correct myself, because I've been corrected. It was not hundreds of thousands that was spent on a website. It was only £161,000 spent on a website.
Well, I mean,
you could have got
£161,000. Really.
You could have had Hollywood stars starring on your website for that kind of money. It's unbelievable.
Well, the thing is that this was only brought to light. I think the guy's name is Will South. I'm not entirely sure, but I think, and he was the former director. Sorry, the former editor of the Architects Journal, and he smelled a bit of malfeasance going on here. This was, hang on a minute, like, how has all of this been allowed to go on? And then he did a bit of digging, and it all started to come to light. This whole chain of events of money being chucked around on a bridge that wasn't even built, and we're supposed to swallow this?
Well, look, I mean, not every number or name that you've mentioned, John, I can vouch for, and it's important that I say that. £30 million came from TfL out of that 53, 20 million of which was on a 50-year loan. And public money made up, I think, 43 of the 53 million. So it's a matter of grave public concern. What I said about it on Twitter, I stand by, but I can't repeat it here now. The reality is the current mayor, was so alarmed by it that he cancelled it, even given the amount of money that had been spent on it. You're correct to say that very eminent architects and architectural journalists and analysts were also deeply alarmed. So I think the best thing I can say here on this platform is that this is a matter that should be raised in Parliament at the highest level in the most forensic way possible, not least because the man who ordered all of this wants to be our next Prime Minister. You get my point. Thanks for the call. Here's Peter in Wigan. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi.
I want to make the main thrust of my call about insects. So forgive me if I can start with Donald Trump. And I think...
He's an orangutan, surely.
Well, yeah, no disrespect to insects when I said that, really. But he's increasingly incoherent, and I'll keep this very brief. But I've come to the conclusion that I really want him to get the money for his wall through a state of emergency, because if he does that, he's likely to take the money from the military, which means that they won't be bombing Syria and Iraq and all the other countries around the world and Yemen as much as they have been. So spend it on a stupid wall, create a few jobs for builders in Mexico and in the southern states, and yeah, better spending it on that than bombing people. So
I think it's a very good point. They're entitled to build the wall. Trump ran on it and got elected on it, so he's entitled to build it. Equally, there's been a change in the Congress. The Congress are entitled, as they see fit, to run their judgment on it. I've got no view on who the United States should allow into their country and who they shouldn't. What walls they build, that's really all a domestic matter for them. I'm quite happy for the United States to do whatever its elected politicians decide to do. What I want, like you, is them to stop trying to tell other people what to do in their countries. I'll give you just this one example, Peter. If Venezuela collapses in chaos, as Iraq collapsed after the last regime change operation, I would have thought most of South America will be on the march as refugees, one way or another, and probably headed north. He might well need that wall if he destroys Venezuela.
George, can I just say, I don't think there'll be any problem in them getting over the wall, because has he never heard of microlights and aircraft?
Well, it's going to be harder to climb than Mount Everest, Peter.
Yeah. Can I just say about the insects?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit older than you, George, and I can remember when I used to go across the fields in Speke in Liverpool, where the Ford's factory, I think it's Jaguar now.
Yeah.
And it was just open fields, ponds and everything. And we used to see dragonflies that were 8 or 10 inches long. I haven't seen one of them.
I haven't seen a dragonfly for many a year, Peter.
Well, I mean, they were massive, you know, and it was like a helicopter coming at you, and you stuck when they came.
Yeah.
But I will say this, right? I live in a town centre in Wigan, in Goulburn, which is an old pit village, and I'm right in the town centre in an old commercial property. I've only got a yard. It's quite a nice yard, or decent yard, and I've got loads of overgrown ivy and stuff, and I'm surrounded by thousands of bees and wasps and everything else.
So it can be done.
It can be done, but I don't live with my wife, but I help her with some gardening stuff, and I plant loads of wildflowers there to encourage the insects. But the point I want to make, because you had your speaker on earlier, this is just what we do as ordinary people, and what the councils do is a drop in the ocean. The big problem for the insects, which I believe could die out in 100 years' time, the main pollinating insects, if we don't do something. The big problem is the commercial companies, agricultural companies, using pharmaceuticals, pesticides and herbicides, and they're killing off the insects massively. And it's all for profit. So what we really need is legislation through Parliament in this country and in other countries. We need legislation to control the use of pesticides. Otherwise, the insects will die out. And
okay, Peter, let's leave it at that, Peter, because the hour is late. A very, very good point. Mary Moe says on the Twitter on that, the best thing anyone can do is put out some flower boxes in their windows or plant flowers in their gardens for the bees and butterflies. Stop using pesticides and also fake grass. A little sugar mixed with water will fuel bees on their way. Let's hear from Michael in Staffordshire. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello, George. Very good show.
Thank you, my friend.
But you're not on more days in the week, but there you go.
Well.
Right. Do you agree or disagree with the fact that the Tories shot themselves in the foot for changing the working industry, which we used to have, into a service industry?
Totally. You know that our economy is now 80% services? 80%.
Yeah, well, no, we wouldn't have had Brexit or the problems in Brexit if we'd have had our own industry.
Exactly. No, I agree entirely with that. I've spent my whole life bewailing the deindustrialization of this country, which began in 1979, and you know the significance of that date. And it's been a deliberate policy. And we have substituted cheap labour from Europe for the skilled labour here. When I was the MP for the East End of London, I went to see Tessa Jowell, God rest her soul. I went to see her about the fact that none of my local community had got a job building the Olympic Stadium. All of the labour had come from Eastern and Central Europe, all of it. And the policy of deciding for the short term rather than the long term has been extraordinarily damaging to this country. Mrs. Thatcher reduced our manufacturing capacity by more than the Luftwaffe managed during the entirety of the Blitz.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I just can't understand why the people can't see what was going on with the Tory party and what they've done to this country.
And Labour. Gordon Brown and Tony Blair did nothing at all to reverse this. They actually compounded it.
Yeah, well, the reason that Maggie Thatcher done that, and people won't have it, is to get rid of the unions in this country,
exactly.
which were a bit of a problem. She got rid of all the workforce.
Exactly. You atomise the workforce, atomise it into small units, delivering pizzas, selling ice cream cones, working in small units in the finance sector, and so on. Unions? What are unions? People don't even know what they are.
Yeah, well,
it's like seeing a sparrow on the streets of London.
I used to work in a factory where we had 40,000 on days and 10,000 on nights.
Wow.
And we had one of her hitmen come in and reduced it to 9,000 on days. And a couple of years later, a complete lot of Leyland shut.
Well, I started my working life in Michelin in Dundee, and there were thousands of skilled, semi-skilled, and labouring workers in a wholly unionised plant, making something of beauty and importance, and now they've declared that that's going to be shut.
I just don't get it. I can't see any answer to it, George.
No, we can't all sell ice cream cones to tourists. That's assuming the tourists keep coming. Michael, thanks for that call. We're running fast out of time. Let me take a break. The wonderful Nat King Cole. And don't forget to watch that movie if you can afford to go to the movies. Maybe look for a special deal somewhere. Go and see Green Book. It's a truly phenomenal film. film, and when you see it, you'll understand why I'm playing Nat King Cole this evening, or one of the reasons for it. Now, Art Bennett says, how dare you liken the noble orangutan to a monster? Very good point taken. Dr. Fath says, seeing that the French translation for party is fête, surely Chukka & Co.'s new venture will literally be a fête, worse than death. Very good. Dan El Rojo says there's a patronising and classist belief on the left that working class leavers were led astray by the likes of the buffoon Boris and his bus. Wrong. We knew what we voted against a long time ago. An elitist, anti-democratic organisation that serves business, not workers. And Jamie says, I love kids. I grew up with them. But there are far too many homes with children that are knee-deep in plastic toys. I'm no Scrooge, he says, unpersuasively. But please, Mum and Dad, it's your children's future that you're destroying with plastics. No, I'm with you on that, Jamie. But let me tell you what happened to me. My 4-year-old son walked through an arch in Chinatown quite recently. And I said, you get to make a wish when you go through that arch. And afterwards I said to him, what did you wish for, son? He said, I wish that you would let me have some plastic junk. Because my normal answer is, no, that's plastic junk. And my child was pining for it, wishing to God for some plastic junk. Here's Laura, always worth hearing, in Camden Town. Laura?
Yeah, hi, good evening.
Hi.
Well, I'd just like to say about the birds and the bees that a lot of people don't know that north, south, east and west across Britain, glyphosate, which in shops is called Roundup, which we otherwise know as Monsanto, is being used in our public squares and parks and pavements and highways and byways across the land. And if you remember 2 decades or 3 decades ago, people were going to fields to object and to protest and to prevent Monsanto being used because they would contaminate other fields and organic food and more natural foods. And yet this is quite...
It's commercially sold, yeah? It's a pesticide commercially sold.
And it's carcinogenic, so children and adults go to these parks and squares and they think they're going there to breathe in fresh air, clean air, and they're getting it on their hands and they're touching it on their skin and they're breathing it into their lungs. It's carcinogenic. It's also a neurotoxin to the brain. And I think someone should do a freedom of information to find out how many authorities are using taxpayer money to purchase and use this poison in our public spaces, and why is it available in the shops? It's disgusting. It's contamination.
Well, look, thanks, Laura. Very strong words there. Obviously, if anyone from Monsanto would like to come on the show next week to answer these points, we'd be delighted to have them. Let's hear from Gareth in Norwich. Gareth, welcome.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Hi. I want to pick up. First, I'm pleased that I caught up with you on Talk Radio again.
Thank you.
And you were mentioned about nobody whistling any.
Yeah, that's a peculiar thing. It just occurred to me today because I was whistling along to Nat King Cole songs in my head when I decided I wanted to feature him tonight, and then I got to thinking, nobody else whistles anymore.
Well, I came across the lovely Jacqueline in Norfolk, who is a Welsh woman. She's now in her 70s and confined to a mobility scooter, but she still has an energy about her which is quite youthful. And because my mum was from Cardiff, I immediately wanted to talk to her. So we got talking, and it came to the point about where was she when she was a teenager, and she told me the story about a 17-year-old young woman that she was walking, being asked to walk up the valley beside, this is probably 1967, so this is the answer to when did the whistling stop. Aberfan, George. That's all I can say simply.
So you think that tragedy and sadness killed whistling?
Well, it did very specifically in that story that that Jacqueline told me. She was up the valley beside the valley where the mountain. She was called Jacqueline. The mountains moved, and she said, "What do you mean?" And she said she was called, and she went up her valley and she looked down on the slag heap that had engulfed the children's school. Now I believe that to be 67. Was that 67?
Very significant and a somber turn in the discussion, Gareth. Thanks for that call. I mean, whistling was once very common. Perhaps it's the decline of the working class that's led to the decline of whistling. Perhaps one whistled at work when work was a more bustling affair, a more collective affair. And that was shown also in popular music. I mean, it was quite often. Val Doonican used to whistle on television on a Saturday night wearing his nice jumpers. Otis Redding whistled in the epic Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Whistling, Bob Dylan has whistled in songs, but you never hear that now, not anymore. Anyway, let's hear from Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Oh, hello, George. I'm
Hi.
sorry, it was getting a bit late, and I thought I wasn't going to get on your radio show tonight.
There's
Thank you
loads
very
of people
much
haven't
indeed.
got on. Even Norma, the legend, isn't on. And I hope she's okay. We're all missing her here. Richard, go ahead.
Oh, it was about Nigel Farage's party, George. I would have liked your views on the fact that, one, is it an insurance policy, as he said when I was listening to him, against the fact that the Blairites are trying to stop Brexit and Lord Adonis.
I think they've now got to calculate that, Richard, that if they do betray the referendum result and call a second referendum when the first one hasn't been implemented, they may very well be handing to a very popular populist leader like Farage the ultimate electoral weapon.
Right. Thanks for explaining that to me. But let's say that Nigel got the support of a large majority of the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he could continue on then and become something, a force in the English Parliament again?
I hope not, because the temptation will be, and always was, UKIP started out as a party with only one objective, but it became, in my view, not his, a monstrosity of right-wing and ever more bizarre, racist and sectarian ideas and so on. That would be a mistake. I think that the Brexit Party should have one purpose only, and if it does, it will get people from the left, right and centre behind it, don't you think?
I would disagree with you there. I would have thought, we discussed it last week when you kindly announced the new Brexit Party. And I remember I said to you, if you could get a tenner apiece of 17.4 million, what the start of a great new party that would be.
Trust me, getting a tenner from people is much harder than you think, Rich.
Oh, I know. I would agree.
If I had tenpence or one pence, I've got 100 million views on YouTube. If I had a penny off them, I'd have my own radio station and my own TV station. But no, I take your point. It's not a bad bed of support to be operating from, is it?
Absolutely brilliant. If that could happen, I think it would change the face of politics in England in view of what's happening with the Conservatives and the Labour Party, who are just like splitting apart.
Yeah.
What we don't want is a Blairite government with the likes of what he can conjure up with the Soros money that's spread about today. We don't want that in our country. We want an independent one. Farage, yourself, No disrespect, probably if you're a lot younger, you'd be a bigger force in England. But if we can have people like yourselves who are telling us the truth, that's all people basically want. We won the referendum, and he said no. And you know yourself, they're trying to stop it. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace.
Yep. Okay, good point to end on, Richard. Thanks, because I've got to squeeze in one more call. It's Donald, where's your trousers in Inverness? Gone yourself, Donald.
Good to hear you, George. It's a privilege to be on the same show.
Thank you, sir.
As GG and Nigel Farage. Between the three of us, we've got a triumvirate of the strongest Eurosceptics in the country, I think.
Excellent. Go ahead.
That's great. And so on the night of Brexit, I tweeted that he should be knighted for services to the UK. But that fell by the wayside.
So far, he might get it. He might get it eventually.
Yes, I would hope so. Once we actually get through the Brexit, I think you need to wait for that to happen, and I'm looking forward to it. The one thing that can be said about Theresa May, that was everybody's saying they can't understand what she's doing, and I mean I understand why people say that, because I mean she has been a disaster. But it would be a feature in any military campaign that you confuse your enemy so that nobody knows what they're doing. So there's just a possibility. The one thing she has said consistently through everything is we are leaving on the 29th of March, and that's my sheet anchor. She says we are leaving. Now, I know that...
Yeah, but Parliament could, even if that was sincere, Donald, Parliament, if it passes this Cooper-Bowles amendment, could make that impossible, could kick the can up the road. And ironically, that's the best possible thing for Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party, because it allows them to fight the European elections.
Yes. So are you saying by that you're looking forward to actually them fighting a European election?
Well, of course, if we leave on the 29th of March, we'll not be fighting the European elections. So the very existence of Nigel's new vehicle will act as a disincentive to parliamentarians to kick the can up the road. But they might take that risk.
Yeah, well, put it this way. I can accept all you're saying, but I still think if we ask ourselves what is going on and what is she thinking, because as you say, she's deliberately gone ahead with motions that she knew she was going to lose. And I personally think that the reason she's done that is to demonstrate to Europe that she cannot get it through. And demonstrating to them that is if she didn't do that, then they would think they could still squeeze us. So I think what we're doing is we're heading towards a no deal, and that suits me fine. I know it doesn't suit the businessmen, and that's the one reason why we were in Europe, was for the sake of business. But I think that'll still be the best outcome, and that this is maybe the direction that
we'll see.
Going.
We'll see. I might. Somebody's just asked me, would you still consider standing as an MEP for Nigel's Brexit Party, as you hinted last Friday? Asks Ben. Well, I couldn't possibly say on the air here. That would be an abuse. Now, Norma called in. She's fine. I'm really sorry that so many callers and texters we were unable to reach, because it's been an extraordinarily busy show. Everyone concerned, please note. A big thanks to my friends, not the least of them, the person who's chosen the music for tonight. I just had the idea. It's them that have chosen the most mellifluous and beautiful Nat King Cole music. Colin says, every week you highlight the absolute need to change the current educational curriculum. It must include a real view of world history, overseen by you. Thanks to you, every day is a school day. Colin in Colchester, age 60. I'll settle for that, Colin.